On May 10, 1857, 85 soldiers of the British East India Company broke ranks in Meerut. The mutineers knew the math. A localized uprising against the company's massive military apparatus was a guaranteed death sentence. To survive, they had to scale the rebellion immediately. That meant acquiring political legitimacy. They marched 58 kilometers southwest and breached the gates of Delhi. They dismantled the local company command structure, killing the British political agent, Simon Fraser, in the process. The sepoys bridged the gap between mutiny and revolution through a calculated political architecture, securing the Mughal throne for symbolic legitimacy and integrating disenfranchised regional leaders into a unified military front. Once Delhi was secured, the mutineers ignored whatever remained of the British administration. They bypassed it entirely and marched straight to the Red Fort. Their target was Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal ruler. At 80 years of age, Zafar was frail, entirely uninterested in warfare, and highly reluctant to lead them. Yet they forced his hand. The soldiers needed the imperial weight of the Mughal court to anchor their cause. By coercing Zafar to accept the title of Emperor of India, the soldiers executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. Despite his physical weakness, centuries of continued Mughal rule had cemented his dynasty as the only widely accepted, traditional symbol of Indian political unity. Zafar was then prompted to write to other regional rulers, urging them to form a united confederacy to dismantle the British regime. Crowning Zafar shifted the legal framing of the conflict. It elevated a localized military dispute over greased cartridges into an organized war of independence against a foreign power. But legal authority is not the same as operational control. While Bahadur Shah Zafar was the de jure head of state, the rebellion required a functioning executive apparatus to actually direct the troops. Enter Subadar Bakht Khan, a 40-year veteran of the East India Company's army who had fought in the Anglo-Afghan wars. He marched his troops 225 kilometers from Bareilly to take command in Delhi. This organizational chart shows the structural solution implemented. Beneath Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, they established the Court of Administration to make strategic decisions. The court was composed of 10 members, 6 from the military and 4 civilians. However, the actual flow of power bypassed the civilian members entirely. Real authority flowed straight from the military representatives down to General Bakht Khan, establishing him as the de facto leader. This dual structure had its flaws. Zafar's advanced age and lack of military insight created internal friction that actively hampered the revolt's tactical execution on the ground. Still, maintaining an empire requires a symbolic figurehead to rally behind and a centralized executive engine to direct the war. In Delhi, the mutineers engineered both. With a central hub established, the revolt rapidly expanded outward to new storm centers. We can trace this diffusion southeast to Kanpur. The nearby town of Bithur was home to Peshwa Baji Rao II. Following the Third Anglo-Maratha War, the company had exiled him there to live out his days on a British pension. The friction here centered on succession. The East India Company refused to recognize his adopted son, Don Dupont, better known as Nana Sahib, as the legitimate heir to the Peshwa title. Under the doctrine of lapse, the British explicitly stated that upon Baji Rao's death, the title would vanish, and the financial pipeline supporting his heir would be permanently cut off. So, when mutinying soldiers arrived in Kanpur looking for leadership, they found a highly motivated, disenfranchised aristocrat ready to take command. Nana Sahib successfully expelled the company forces from Kanpur and declared himself Peshwa. Crucially, he maintained national unity by acknowledging Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Emperor of India, positioning himself legally as a regional governor. The company's station commander in Kanpur, Sir Hugh Wheeler, ultimately surrendered and was killed on June 27, 1857. The rapid spread of the conflict was actively fueled by the company's own policies. By systematically disenfranchising regional royals, the British inadvertently provided the mutinous soldiers with a ready-made, highly organized leadership network across northern India. When we zoom out, the geopolitical structure of the rebellion becomes clear. The events of 1857 were not spontaneous chaos. The sepoys rapidly engineered a sophisticated political architecture, combining their own sheer military force with the pre-existing traditional legitimacy of the Indian aristocracy. The irony is that British administrative overreach, stripping away titles and cutting pensions, was the exact catalyst required to unite their military forces and political rivals against them. To see how this unified front tested the limits of British military capability, we have to look at the remaining storm centers, particularly the grueling sieges in Awadh and Lucknow. Analyzing these structural mechanics provides the necessary framework for understanding the geopolitical foundations of modern Indian history.